Welcome, HR leaders and organization development professionals. Today, I have with me Dr. David Burkus, professor professor of management at Oral Roberts University, and author, third-time author of the book that just came out, Friend of a Friend. It is a superb read. I just completed it. And I've asked David to speak to us today.
And I wouldn't have said yes unless he said it was a superb read. So
absolutely, that's right. So he's going to share with us some of the key concepts from Friend of a Friend. It's powerful, reshaping understanding of what it means to network. I don't know about you, but the promise of this book was basically, if you hate networking, you'll love this book because it looks at networking from a completely different perspective. So David, why don't you kick us into that? How is what you discovered different from typical networking?
Yeah, I mean, the networking for a lot of people is sort of a 4-letter word, right? It shouldn't be. It's a 10-letter word. That's just spelling.
Right.
But no, I mean, it makes people feel dirty. It makes people feel sleazy, et cetera. And I fundamentally think the reason for that is twofold. Number one, it's that most people, when they hear the term networking, the only thing they think about is adding new connections. They just think about, growing their network, right, adding the number of people they're connected to on LinkedIn or the number of business cards they collected at an event, et cetera. That additive approach. In reality, I come at it from a very different angle, which is that you don't have a network, so you can't grow your network or improve your network or whatever. It's not yours. You exist inside of a network. And what you should probably do is figure out how best to navigate that network. What are the principles that are universally true about all networks so that the community, whether that network be an industry or just a larger organization, et cetera, that network affects, really, it's the best networkers are the people that navigate the network they're in best, not the people who have the biggest collection of contacts. There's certainly a place for that, but it's just one element of it. So that's one fold. And then the second is, I think a lot of people, and if you're watching this, it's probably true for you too, they take people's advice on how to give the perfect elevator pitch or how to do an introduction or how to break the ice at a cocktail party, what have you. And advice is great, but advice is autobiographical. It's one person or maybe two people, if it's a co-authored book's advice on how to grow your network based on what they did. And that works if you're a carbon copy of that person. Most of us aren't. So we're standing there trying to remember what the advice we read was and trying to put it to practice and literally pretending to be someone else in that moment. And then we complain that we feel inauthentic. Well, no wonder you're trying to be someone else.
So my experience of networking, and as you may know, if you've been with me for a while, you know that I've been in small business now for 10 years straight and longer. And so all of the networking, it was hard. It didn't work. I'd show up at the meetings and I'm like, okay, what is that thing I'm supposed to remember? Mm-hmm. And then everything seems stilted. Whereas the things that did seem to work for me from a business development perspective were more around how can I help you and how can I understand you? And let's get to a real conversation that provides value. And I think that's some of where your book went.
I mean, again, the biggest problem is we need to think about networking in more holistic terms than just going to that event, right? Mm-hmm. It's more than just an event. In fact, there's a whole wealth of research that supports what you said, that those events just don't work, right? Mm-hmm. And it's much more about understanding the network you're already in, who is already connected to whom, who you need to be connected to, where you are. Are you on the fringes or are you in the center? Mm-hmm. And I mean, a great way to sort of gravitate towards that center is that as you're meeting new people, you're thinking, how can I help them? Who could I introduce them to that's in my network, et cetera, that is taking care of the entire network. And then there's a spillover effect to you, but you don't really do it for the spillover effect. You do it because it's being a decent human being. And then it's weird. The world seems to reward people who are decent human beings most of the time. There's obviously successful, not decent human beings, but most of the time.
And not successful, decent human beings, unfortunately.
Right.
So one of them in the book, you refer to a term called people who are super connectors. Mm-hmm. Define that.
So this is a really interesting term. In network science, this refers to people that have a disproportionate number of connections. So we think if I were to graph everybody, let's say in an organization, and then who else in the organization they know, we think we'd have like a inverted U, a normative distribution. There's an average and then a bell curve, right? Okay. The truth is it actually would follow a power law. There are some people that are going to be connected to, tens of thousands of people, and then others that are a couple hundreds. We call those people with a disproportionate number of super connectors. It's actually kind of this weird quirk of the history of network science. We call them that because the theory went that they were the people that kept the whole network together. They were the reason for the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. We've since found that there's nothing special about Kevin Bacon, and there's nothing special about...
Which you exploded. Right. He explodes that actually in the book. Right? Okay.
But so, those are the people, while they have a disproportionate number of connections, the networks are usually so resilient that you don't need them to make the network all interconnected. That said, they do tend to be the people who, if I were to map out the whole network of an organization, would gravitate towards the center of that drawing. And as such, are providing the most value for the network in terms of building connections, but also spreading information, et cetera. So you want to be a super connector. It doesn't mean that you need to know tens of thousands of people, but even just inside your organization, you want to be the person that knows who to go to for what information, and that people are willing to kind of give that. So even if the company is only 100 people or only 50 people, right, there's still some differences between how many people know how many people. You want to be that person that has a really solid sense for what the entire organizational network looks like.
Okay, so in the book, not only is there, so David typically starts off with a story, very interesting, right? Then he digs you into the research, and then it comes out to practical implication, and there's a section from science to practice, okay, which I appreciate very much in terms of bringing it down to something I can do to put those principles into practice. Now, having said that, I want to be a superconductor. Connector. I cannot be a
superconductor. Is a term that my autocorrect kept wanting me to write. It's a term from electrical engineering.
Right. So
it's actually pretty close to what we're talking about. Right. But yeah.
So I want to be a super connector. How do I do that?
So there's two things. I mean, the biggest thing to start doing is to start being generous with the connections that you already have. So I think one of the reasons we call those networking events or any opportunity where you're meeting new people so ineffective is that so many of us are just searching for, can I be useful to this person, or are they useful to me? And the likelihood that any given person you meet is going to desperately need exactly the service that you provide is very minimal. On the other hand, the likelihood that they might need to be introduced to somebody in your roster of connections is very high. And so what I coach a lot of people to do is be thinking, when you're meeting that new person, be thinking about who would they benefit from getting to know. Right. Again, that's being a good person. Okay. But the other thing that it does is gradually, as you're the one making and building more connections, you're moving yourself more towards the center of the network. There's actually this whole thing in network science called preferential attachment that explains that as you're doing this, it's also making it more likely that as new people are entering the network, other people are going to introduce them to you, which is essentially what you want. You get this kind of flywheel effect. But it starts by basically being generous, right? What's the sales term? Always be closing, right? ABC. It's really ABG, right? Always be generous, always be giving with those new connections.
Okay. All right.
I guess you could do ABC, always be connecting, but that's proof that I've never thought about this before.
So another concept in your book that just stood out to me was, or put it differently, in leadership, we've always been told you can't be friends with people you work with. But you took that differently. You found out otherwise.
Yeah. So there's this whole phenomenon in network science called multiplexity. It's a really fancy SAT where it's great for Scrabble. It's a really fancy word that basically...
Scrabble with friends, words with friends, right?
That refers to the number of contexts for connections that people have, right? So we tend to put people in a bucket: work friends, real friends, church friends, gym friends, what have you. And then if there's only one context for connection, that's a uniplex tie. If there's multiple, so you go to work together, but you also see each other at the gym, right? Or you also go to church together, or your kids go to the same school, et cetera, that's a multiplex tie. So there's a couple things that we know from the research. We know that people build deeper connections to each other faster when there's more context for connection. That's the benefit of multiplexity. We've also looked at performance ratings of people who are have more multiplex ties than uniplex ties in an organization, and they tend to be better performers. There is a downside in that it does bring in a little bit more drama into the workplace, right? Okay. If you're real life friends with someone you're also sort of work friends with, and she gets promoted over you, that can feel worse than if it's if it's nothing personal, it's just business.
Okay.
Where the research appears to point is that the benefits, speed of finding information, speed of recruiting other people to a project, et cetera, all of those things are a far bigger bump to performance than they are a drag on that emotional drain. Okay. So there might be a little more drama at work, but it's worth it.
So the short answer is be friends, assuming you can find various ways where you can connect. That will strengthen the tie, but that will also open us up, make us more valuable to one another.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing I would tell people, if you want to put this, to go for science practice, is stop asking the "so what do you do" question, right? We do this in the industry, but we also do it in the organization, right? Okay. And while it's a helpful question, because it's good to know what their actual function in the organization is, we tend to...
It puts people in a box.
It puts people in a box. It keeps the conversation work-related instead of going sort of wandering around, so you're finding these more multiplex connections. So if I were to ask you a question instead of like, hey, what's really exciting to you right now that you're working on? It could be that you're working on, or what's going on in your life that's really exciting. Or you could tell me about your kid who just finished soccer league and his team was undefeated, right? Or you could tell me something else. You have a say in what you would then disclose to me. It wouldn't just be work related. Whereas if I say, so what do you do? It just keeps that in. The other thing that it does is, like you said, it puts people in a box. And if I decide like, I don't even know anybody from marketing, I work in legal, then we're sort of keeping all of those silos, politics and turf wars that we know we're supposed to hate, right? We're keeping in that because we're leading with that question. So that's probably the number one thing to do.
That's excellent. So let me see, just in interest of time, two more questions.
Okay.
What surprised you in your research?
So
what were you expecting? Let me back it up just a little bit, right? So you don't need to buy the book, actually. Don't buy the book. You're just going to watch this video
and buy it.
You're going to get it all.
Actually.
Yeah. Anyway, so go ahead. So
give it to a friend.
You were generally expecting to see what? Because I know we all go into it saying, hey, I think this is a cool topic, but I kind of know how it's going to go.
Yeah, I mean, there's the book is structured in such a way that each chapter is a different insight from the world of network science, and so it wasn't an overarching thing that surprised me. One thing we talk about in the book is this idea of homophily, which translates from the Greek love of same, but it's a phenomenon in all networks that people cluster together by similar industry, right? This is where we get silos in organizations, but they cluster by ethnicity, they cluster by political affiliation, which makes perfect sense. I mean, it's not good, but it makes sense why they're doing it, because you see it everywhere today. They cluster by a lot of different things. And what was surprising to me was that is only a small percentage of that is a natural inclination towards the same. Right? So the way that I describe it is like, it's 2018. Most people know that they need diversity in their community. Organizations know we need diversity, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So the reason there isn't as much diversity as we see isn't because people are secretly bigots. I was kind of expecting them to be. In reality, what drives homophily is that diversity is a network issue. So you have a little small tendency towards same, and that creates a cluster of close-knit ties. In a lot of organizations, we call this the old boys club, right? Because it's just been compounding for so long. That's how the gender breakdown tends to work. But there's a small cluster. And then as new introductions come to you from other people that are your close ties, because your close ties are already self-similar to you, those new introductions are also likely to be self-similar.
Right.
So you can be earnestly, honestly, but if you're not being intentionally working towards growing diversity in your network, growing it in an organization, et cetera, and if you're not being intentional about who is connected to who and why, you're just letting it all happen organically, you could end up with a far less diverse organization or a far less diverse network yourself than what your goal is. In the book, we talk about a couple different companies that this happens to. And one of the biggest ones is a podcasting company that I happen to like called Gimlet, that knew exactly. They had this sort of come to Jesus meeting where they realized, we don't have as much. It's actually ironic that I call it a come to Jesus meeting because they realized they don't have enough religious diversity either. Kind of like everybody was, they really didn't have anybody of faith, not just Christian, but Muslim, et cetera. They were all sort of. But they found that the primary reason is, where are we getting new people? Well, we're getting them from referrals. Well, then no wonder they're all self-similar to us. And so they have to start taking deliberate efforts. What I tell a lot of leaders to do in this situation is to audit your network. Look at who are, let's say, the top 25 people that you're talking to the most often, that are in the same meetings as you, et cetera. I mean, go pull open your calendar, pull open your phone and your scheduling app or whatever you use and go back through and see who all was there and who am I talking to the most often, you're probably going to find that 20 or so out of 25 of them are really similar to you.
So help me out here, because right now, actually, I just left a meeting with another company. We're working on doing some diversity and inclusion training with them. So that is particularly in the Me Too age that we're in right now. That's taken a renewed importance. I think a lot of companies sincerely want more inclusion.
But it's being a network problem. What's the
implication? What do I need to do as a leader if I'm really going to create a more inclusive?
So for you personally, it's a different answer than for the whole organization. For you personally, that audit is just the first step. So you're going to find 20 or so out of the 25, maybe 15 if you're being good at this, that are very self-similar to you. But now you also have a list of the people who aren't. And now you can be much more intentional about spending extra time from them, leaning in closer and listening to them more often, asking for introductions for them so that you grow the network through those people. Most people, this is why the book's called Friend of a Friend, most people grow their networks organically through their common context. That also happens to be what creates the problem with diversity. If the contacts are too self-similar to start with, it just compounds and gets worse. But if you figure out who the people that are different from you are and you lean into wanting to get more relationships from them, you end up growing the level of diversity in your personal network. Okay. Inside an organization, this is actually, we looked at a lot of research on this for writing the book. This is actually an area that T&D departments in particular and OD departments as a whole can really benefit in. So there's a couple different organizations whose, whether they called it, Pixar University or just their T&D department, et cetera, who were doing trainings that were specifically designed for really no other reason than getting people together, right? So most of Pixar's training, for example, is around, okay, we're making this film, so we need to know this. Like we're making Moana. Technical type, but also like we're making Moana, so let's bring some hula dancers in and teach people about the Pacific Islands and dances so we can animate better, right? On the other hand, though, there's other just random stuff they do just to kind of bring people together. And the irony is, if you go sort of wide, it's a really easy way, I think, to point out the ROI on training that doesn't seem like it's immediately applicable, because the ROI is, well, different people from different departments are going to sign up for this. They're going to be embedded in a shared activity alongside each other for a couple of days, or if it's like a 1 day a week type training for several months, they're going to be forced to be interacting with people that they don't normally interact with. And long term, really, this is where I think the T&D or the larger sort of learning element of an organization can be the driver for diversity, much more than the way that HR in general, unfortunately, gets a bad rap of thinking it's about so quotas and all sorts of check marks and representation, et cetera. If you create the events that draw a diverse set of people together, then those diverse set of people do get to know each other more. Not a cocktail party, not something like that, but a shared activity that they're embedded in can really, over the long term, compound and help kind of create that integration that you actually want. I mean, the worst thing you could do is hit all of the right markers for level of representation of every protected class in an organization, but none of them talk to each other. Right? That would be awful. And so this is a way to sort of force them in through these shared activities. So have a little more fun with the training classes that you're offering. Make it a little bit more likely to draw sort of diverse set of people. And this, I think, is a great way to sell it to whoever you need to sell it to. That, look, I know that it's not exactly product training or what have you, but it will bring people together in a way that nothing else we're doing as an organization will.
Excellent. Any other takeaways? If you said, hey,
well, I hope we're fast, because that was a doorbell.
So if you would say, hey, here's the one thing that you hope everybody gets out of the book, or the reason they should buy the book, actually.
In triplicate.
Right.
Again, I think the biggest thing is we have this tendency to think that networking is about meeting new people, or it's about sales, or it's about job hunting. The people that win, the networkers that are the best, are the people that realize there's already a network. The leaders that serve their organization the best are the ones that understand that my organization is a network, and how I care for it and cultivate it, like a garden or some other terrible analogy, how I take care of it in that capacity is going to dramatically affect not just my own career and success, et cetera, but the organization as a whole. You don't grow your network. You don't have a network. You exist inside of one, or if you're in a leadership role, your job is to take care of one. And so start to map that out and get an understanding for what it is and how it works.
Excellent. Well, so thanks everyone for joining us today. Again, David Burkus, his new book, friend of a friend. Get a copy in triplicate and join us next time. Thanks so much. Oh.